Hello and welcome to the Books Uncovered podcast, a podcast brought to you by Fulcrum Publishing, where we explore the world of books and the people who make up the publishing and the book industry. I'm Sam Shinta, publisher of Fulcrum Publishing, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kateri Kramer, Fulcrum's marketing director. Hello, Kateri. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm thrilled that the Nuggets are in the finals.
Well, there you go. Yes, congratulations.
I know it's a little sad for you Wisconsin people, but we're really happy here.
Especially since the Miami Heat, of course, defeated us in that horrible first round.
It's
so
probably a little bit sour there, but
yes. And, Kateri, I was thinking, because it's now post-Memorial Day, and having lived in Colorado, I know that this is the time where maybe you can actually get out there. So I've been thinking about this all day. Kateri, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?
My mom used to sing that to me, actually, which is so funny that you say that. It's good. We got to put stuff in the garden a lot earlier than normal this year. The main issue has been that a lot of the flower beds are being flooded because of how much rain we've been getting.
No.
It's just been coming down so fast that if they don't have really, really good drainage, they can kind of drown the plants, but we need the moisture so badly that it doesn't even matter. So.
Yeah, it's that inevitable trade-off. Well, here in the upper Midwest, we're actually at a dry spell right now. We haven't had moisture in a couple of weeks, which is very unusual for us. We had so much spring moisture. And so now it's like people's lawns are getting a little brown. And of course, out here, people don't know how to deal with that. That you don't need to go and overwater it. It'll all be okay eventually.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. Well, we have simply a wonderful, wonderful guest today, someone who I've known for a long time, and I'm just so happy is able to join us today. Sandra Dallas is a New York Times bestselling author of 18 adult novels, 5 middle grade novels, and 10 nonfiction books. She was a reporter for Business Week for 25 years, covering the Rocky Mountain region. Her experiences as a reporter have been incorporated into her novels, which have been translated into dozens of foreign languages and have been optioned for films. She is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Women Writing the West Willa Award and the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum's Wrangler Award. Sandra lives in Denver and Georgetown, Colorado, with her husband and has 2 daughters. And I'm going to embarrass her a little bit here. I found on my shelves, among my many Sandra Dallas books, a galley for Prayers for Sale, one of her books that she'd done a while back. I'm just going to read this line here from the woman who at the time was the executive editor at St. Martin's Press. It says, "Dear reader, Sandra Dallas is the kind of author booksellers love to hand sell, readers love to talk about, librarians love to recommend, and reviewers love to praise. But more people need to know about her. More people need to discover the power of her writing, the subtle humor that illuminates the prose, and the sharp-eyed perception that helps you learn about these characters and yourself. I usually find myself crying at the ends of books after I become invested in the characters and their troubles and triumphs." So welcome, Sandra Dallas. I think I will say those lines hold true for all of the books that I have read of yours. They are just quite simply beautiful. Welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
How are you doing? So are you in Georgetown right now, or are you in Denver?
No, I'm in Denver.
Okay.
Kateri, I'm waiting for the rain.
Okay. So drying out and then waiting for the next rains.
Yeah, my lights are flickering right now. I don't know how bad it is where you are, but it's coming. I can tell.
It is. The sky's dark.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, hopefully we are able to hold out before the big storms really come. So Sandra, I know you started your career as a journalist, and again, writing for Business Week and covering the Rocky Mountain region. How did that experience as a journalist, as a news writer, shape your subsequent career and very successful career as a novelist?
I think as a journalist, you learn to write concisely, to write without a lot of adverbs, no adverbs, in fact, and very little, few adjectives. You learn to write all the time. If you go to your editor when you're a reporter and say, "Oh, it's just not coming today," you get another job. So I write through any kind of writer's block that I have. And it helped with the discipline a lot. It helped me think of writing as a business, as a job that I do, rather than as some sort of God moving my hands on the computer and taking dictation from on high. I don't think of writing as being some kind of mysterious thing.
And you mentioned process. So when you are writing a new book, do you approach it very much like you did when you were doing stories for the news, that you have a scheduled time and you approach it very much like a job, like this is where I'm going to work on this. This is how I'm going to approach this.
Yes and no. I from the standpoint of treating it like a job and writing every day, writing a certain amount, and I do that. But writing fiction is so much different for me anyway, from reporting. With reporting, you have a notebook on your desk and you have to get that information into your computer in some sort of readable form. With fiction, you don't know what's going to happen. You sit at your computer and I don't outline. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust this process that something actually occurs to me while I'm writing. And things very often surprise me. I remember my first book, I realized toward the end that two of my main characters were going to get married. And I sat there at my computer and I hugged myself. I was so happy for them. And they were pretty happy when I told them about it. It's a completely different process as far as I'm concerned.
That is absolutely wonderful, because, I've talked with authors, fiction authors, and read a lot that, several of them do the outlining. They have a sense of the beginning, middle, and end, that they know where they want to get to, that they really have kind of charted a path and then they fill in. But for you, it's just a much more organic process, that you start with the idea and the characters and then let the characters take you to where the story goes.
It is. I think every writer has to determine what works. People will ask you, how do you write and what should I do? And you have to figure it out for yourself. What works for me may not work for the next person. And I know where my book's going to start and I know where it's going to end. With my latest book, Where Coyotes Howl, I had the final line in the book probably 5 years before I ever wrote the book. I knew exactly how it would end. Sometimes I'd get to the ending and things very obvious and change it. And then subplots and new characters occur to me as I go along. It's a process I don't understand, but it works.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that line. It's a process I don't understand, but it seems to work for you. And at the risk of, I appreciate that every writer has to approach this their own way, and their personality has to be a reflection of their process. But you were talking about writer's block before, and the fact that because you worked as a journalist, that doesn't seem to be a struggle for you. So do you basically have the situation where you're just able to write your way through any potential writer's block, just because, again, you see that you just have to keep the story going? Or is there something just more mysterious about that for you?
No, I write through it. I usually write a page a day, which is, 600-700 words. And if I'm really having a tough time, I may go down to half a page or even a quarter of a page, but I do write every day. It's not to say the writing's any good. It's just that I say that I do it. And then I go back and once I've stumbled through the process, then I go back and do some rewriting on it.
So are you a constant reviser, or do you wait till you get a significant chunk or the whole thing out and go back and revise?
I constantly revise. What I do is write that page a day. The next day I read that page and edit it and then add a second page. Sometimes I will add a line or two just to get that page going. And then I frequently and then the third day I, read the 2 pages and then third until it gets to be 5 or 6 pages. And then you're constantly thinking about it. You're always writing. James Thurber said once that he was at a cocktail party and his wife came up to him and said, "Thurber, stop writing. And he said, she caught me in the middle of a sentence. And so you're constantly thinking about it, as I think you do with any profession. If you're a doctor, you may be thinking about an operation or a patient who's sick or something. But writers are always aware of their characters. They live with their characters. Their characters are very real to them.
Yeah, it's so funny you say this, and it's so great to hear this. I've done a lot of work with high school students over the last 7 or 8 years on writing and writing process, and often working on nonfiction writing, not fiction. But one of the things I tell the students is either keep a notebook with them or have a notes on their phone, of course, because they're all carrying around phones, and basically doing the same thing, because inspiration will strike at the oddest times. And you should always be thinking about the thing you're writing about so that you can jot that idea, that line, that, oh, this is a fact that I maybe want to include in here. Somebody said something interesting. You have to be receptive to bringing that in, or you really can't call yourself a writer, right? That you're just not open to that craft that way.
That is absolutely true, Sam. Long before I ever started writing fiction, I was in a Chinese restaurant in Butte, Montana. I was one of those little private booths with a shower curtain in the door. And when people when people can't see you, they assume you can't hear what they're saying. And I was listening to the conversations on either side of me. And in Butte, people have a unique way of speaking. And for no reason at all, I had my notebook with me. I was there in a story. I started writing down their conversations. And they weren't salacious or even very interesting, but it was the way they put words together, the way they started to say something and stopped, the way they spoke in incomplete sentences. Only Barack Obama speaks in complete sentences. Most people just speak in fragments of sentences. And I wrote all of that down. I had no idea why I did that. And then about 5 years later, when I started writing fiction, I went back and I used a lot of that dialogue in the first book. So I always have paper with me, and you can pretend you're writing a grocery list or something so people don't know what you're doing. But you always write down. For me, it's conversations that I hear, ways of speaking, remarks, and I have to write them down, because if I don't, the chances are I remember them incorrectly.
Well, and that authenticity absolutely shows through in your books. I mean, they're beautifully written in that way. The other thing, and I'm wondering if this was also a product of the work that you've done before, is that most of your books are historical fiction. So they're set in the past, but they really are able to connect in a visceral way with the actuality of those times. Do you spend a lot of time researching for those projects?
That's nice of you to say, Sam. I do some research, not as much as you might think, because I know a lot about the subjects already. I've written a lot about the West, both as a journalist, and then I started writing nonfiction books about history. And so I know some of the background. You have to have, with nonfiction, you have to have everything that happened. You have to know everything. With fiction, you want enough information so that the reader assumes you know what you're talking about. And you want enough to give a patina to the story, but you don't want the history or the background to overwhelm the story, because it's the story itself that matters.
Yeah, and it's that authenticity that you really do capture. I don't ever feel like I'm reading a history book when I'm reading your novels. I feel like I'm reading something that is set authentically in those times.
Thank you.
If you can understand or, kind of see the difference there.
Did your background in journalism change or influence the way that you approach research at all?
I think it made me more interested in talking to people, not in doing library research, but in going someplace. My idea, usually the setting comes first when I write a book. And I love going to wherever the book is set and soaking up the atmosphere. Eastern Colorado. I should set books in Paris, because I'd much rather go there than some of the places where my books are set. But I go there and just feel it, and I talk to people and get a sense of what it's like there. And that's much more repertorial than going to the library and looking at microfilm, which I hate to do. That's one of the reasons I stopped writing nonfiction.
Can you talk a little bit about like the initial process of getting your first book published, what that was like, your interactions with the publisher, that kind of thing?
I was very lucky that I had an agent before my fiction was ever published. My first nonfiction book, I simply wrote to the publisher, and he sent back a letter saying, "Okay, we'll publish the book." It was very simple back then. With my novel, it went from publisher to publisher, and then my agent sent it to a wonderful editor who bought it right off the bat. And I thought, I have really lucked into the easiest career in the world, because the first book turned out to be very easy to sell. The second one, Persian Pickle Club, not so much. That was turned down by, I don't know how many publishers before it was finally accepted. And then it became a very big book. It was considered the first of what later became known as quilt novels. Although my book is not a quilt novel, there's a whole genre of books out there that involve quilts, and I seem to have been the first one to have quilts in my book.
I was just curious, because I know I talk to a lot of young writers, especially who write fiction that might be not in a, I would say kind of in the same vein as yours, where it like tends more literary, and they haven't had the experience where they're able to find an agent or a publisher right away. What would your advice for those people be?
Oh, I hate that question, because it is so hard to get published and so hard to find an agent. And the only advice I can give is don't give up. That sooner or later, if you're good, somebody is going to pick up your book. But it is so discouraging. Writing is the easy part. It's getting published that's really tough.
It is. And it's a little bit of a numbers game about how many people you send to. And I think the universe kind of takes it into its hands at some point and sends you to the right person or the right publisher. But you have to really get it out there in the beginning.
You do. You have to just keep going. And I don't know. I understand that, people can do blogs and different things, but that's pretty much out of my element, because I don't understand technology, and my books were published long before those things happened.
You mentioned the quilting novels, and of course you built a series around that. So you basically just kind of lucked into this whole genre that you discovered that there were readers for, in a sense. Or maybe stumbled into, or whatever the right word is.
And I think that's the right word.
Yeah. And I mean, so what was that like to basically, write something that all of a sudden is adopted by this whole niche community that is obviously clamoring for more? And I remember talking about this whole series with you a long time ago, this whole idea that these readers are voracious about these books and about the connections with authors.
Oh, they are. And stumbled is exactly the right word. I knew there were quilters out there when I wrote the Persian Pickle Club, which is a book about a group of quilters in Kansas in the 1930s with a secret. I didn't know there were 27 million, and they spend $3.3 billion a year, and they are a huge market. And I remember going to a book signing at a mystery bookstore because there was a murder in the book. So I was asked to go, and there were all of these mystery writers there. There were probably 6 of us who were signing books, and I would see people come down the line, and they would speak to each of the, mostly women, each of the authors and say, "I really liked your last book." And they would come to me and they would say, "I love this book." And I thought, what are you talking about? And it reached something, and I don't know what. I have no idea how books appeal to people. And when I wrote my first novel, I thought I was writing a historic novel. It was readers who said I was writing about loyalty and friendship. And with the quilting thing, I guess it touched a sense of connection that women have. And that's what they get through quilting. Quilters happen to be very nice people. I'm told embroiderers are not so nice, but quilters are nice. And they love to read, and they're a very loyal audience. And so there are just all kinds of books. There are quilt mysteries, quilt romances, quilt murders, quilt everything out there. But
yes,
my books, as I say, are not quilt novels, because quilting is not the center part of the novel. It is, I am a novelist who happens to like quilts. And so I involve them in my books to some degree.
But you were able to tap into something and then continue. So I love this notion that you were able to continue the thing that you loved, and yet there was a whole audience there for the part of the novels that they were really interested in, that was speaking to them, that wasn't being fulfilled in some way.
It is now, though.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah. Just go into any Barnes and Noble and go into the cozy mystery section, and you see lots of quilting or crafting sorts of mysteries that, I mean, yeah, people have discovered the market, but that's wonderful that you were such a pioneer in that.
Only by accident.
Well, but this is why I love talking with you, because you're talking about your first book getting published, about the quilting piece. So many of these are happy accidents, right? That you have the skills to do what you do, which is to be an excellent writer, but you're also lucky enough to be in the right places and the right times, and this whole idea of luck and pluck. Right, that you have the skills and the capabilities, and you put yourself out there, and you know what you're doing. But
there's no question luck has played an important part in my whole life. I've just been at the right place at the right time.
And I think it's important for authors, future authors, to hear that you just have to keep, I love your whole idea of perseverance, right? You have to keep doing it, because at some point something will break.
I think that's so.
You also do book reviews. How does that play into your fiction writing? How do you choose books? Like, does reading lots of other books help or hinder your own writing? How does that kind of fit into your own writing life?
I think in the beginning, reading is, well, the old saw, you learn to write by writing. You learn to write by reading. And so I think in the beginning, reading other books was very important. I'm not sure that the books I review figure too much into it. And I review books literally that get sent to me. I don't go searching for them. Occasionally I'll ask for a book, but usually I'm approached by publishers or authors to review books.
How many books, I'm always curious about this process at newspapers, like how many books are you getting a month? How do you make the decision which ones get reviewed? I know some people are very like, I will only publish positive reviews. If I didn't like the book, I won't write a review about it. What's your philosophy there?
When I started reviewing books for the Post, which was over 60 years ago, the book editor told me, if a book isn't any good, don't review it. Why give space to a book that's no good? There's a difference between not liking a book and the book being no good. Mm-hmm. But if the book isn't any good, why give space to it? Why not give space to something that people should read? So people will say to me, oh, you never review anything you don't like. And that's absolutely true, but there's a reason for that. I actually do review some books I don't like. It's because I know that readers will want to read them, even though I don't like them.
And did I hear this correctly? You've been reviewing for the Denver Post for 60 years now.
I'm pretty old, Sam.
Well, so it must mean you're 61 years old. But so
like that.
You must be one of the longest running book reviewers in the country at this point.
Well, I
would imagine. That's simply remarkable. I mean, that is a remarkable legacy in and of itself, beyond the fact that you are a best-selling author.
Yeah, I'm kind of an AARP poster girl, I guess.
and you're still going strong, which is simply wonderful. So how many books are you reviewing right now for the Post every week or every month?
I write 2 columns a month. The
Okay.
first is about books of regional interest, and I have anywhere from 3 to 5 books a month in that. And then I do one from time to time about mysteries. It's not on a regular schedule, and I may do 6 books with very short reviews. And I read them all. I don't review off the book jackets. I read all the time. My sister said once that hell for us is being someplace without a book.
It sounds very familiar. Yeah.
In terms of regional books, I think sometimes they get kind of a bad rap because it's like, oh, they have this like niche interest, or they're like too specific. They won't appeal to a larger audience. And I definitely don't find that to be the case. I think that a lot of times a regional book, the specificity kind of creates a universality of it. But are there any favorite regional books to Colorado that you find yourself going back to or recommending really frequently?
I agree with you about regional books. I love the idea that somebody finds a new subject or a new way of looking at something in Colorado. I remember some years ago, I reviewed a book about bootlegging in Montana, in Leadville.
Oh,
And
cool.
nobody had written about that. And it was some young woman who wrote about it as her thesis or something. And it was just wonderful coming across that. By the way, I don't review self-published or vanity press books. Occasionally I'll review self-published history of some local town that's where the readership of it is too small to interest the publisher. And very often I'll get ideas from some of the books I read. I don't keep them. I give most of them away, but I'll keep 1 or 2 that I think I'm going to draw on for something that I write. I think I overlooked your question.
Oh, that's okay. Your answer was better than my question, but are there any regional books that you recommend or read over and over?
Well, everyone loves Tom Noel, who's known as Dr. Colorado.
Yeah.
In fact, Tom and I, I'll put a plug in here for Fulcrum. Tom and I are revising the Colorado book, which Fulcrum published 30 years ago. I was one of the 4 people who put it together then, and 2 of them are no longer living, and the other was an art historian. And so Fulcrum asked me if I would be interested in doing it, updating it. And I said I would do it if Tom Noel would be involved, because I knew he knew so much about history and was such a wonderful person to work with. And his writing is just superb, although we're not writing anything for the book. It will be just excerpts from various writers. And so, but I admire Tom's work, and anything he writes is worth reading.
You know, it's so funny, Kateri and Sandra, both, you talk about this whole idea of regional fiction and how it is almost like a scarlet letter in the publishing industry. Oh, that's just a regional book. But I remember someone, and it could have been Bob Barron, our publisher, I just don't remember, a long time ago, pointing out that, every book has to be set somewhere. Right? I mean, Moby Dick is set in New England, and Tolstoy's War and Peace is set in Russia, right? Those are regional books that transcend the region. And so when we say, oh, well, that's just a Colorado story, but so many of those stories transcend the area. They talk about human emotions and human experience in a way that and those are and they're universal in their way. So I love that you celebrate regional fiction, and I just wish we'd get away from using it as a pejorative in our wider culture.
There's a line, Easterners write literature, Northerners write literature, Southerners write literature, Westerners write Westerns. And I think that's the way they're treated. And yet you look at how important the whole Western movement was to America.
Absolutely.
And there have been some great writers who've come out of the West.
Yeah, absolutely.
if you read, I think you were asking about local writers, I think were so good. Kent Harif.
Oh, yeah.
His books are so outstanding.
Peter
You
Heller.
can put him up against anybody.
Yeah. We have
Well-
lots of really great writers, like Peter Heller's amazing. Do you know Kali Fajardo-Onstein? She writes about like West Side Denver. Her books are definitely not considered regional, but her books are amazing. And she writes about like Denver, but also the Western Slope and Southern Colorado and all of this amazing stuff. And she's really great. David Hicks, his book is set in the West. There's lots and lots of really, really good writers in our state.
Manuel Ramos.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are set in North Denver.
Well, and I go beyond Denver when I think about the West. Willa Cather, right, is writing about Nebraska. Sure. John Steinbeck is writing about the Salinas Valley in California. I mean, that's West. And here he goes and wins.
There's another regional writer.
Yeah, another regional, one of those regional writers, writes what is in his backyard. And but yeah, it's simply, you're absolutely right that this idea of saying, I love that. We see the same thing in the Midwest. We feel the same way out here, that we're kind of stuck in this little category of, well, no, you're not. It's not literature. It's Midwestern books. And
really, is literature in the Midwest?
No. I'm saying it's literature in the East. I love your discussion of all the surrounding areas are writing literature, and we in the Midwest and West are kind of stuck in this whole other category. We're just doing regional books out here. Well, this, while we're talking about books, this is my favorite segment, and Sandra, you knew very well the person who inspired this segment of our podcast, Dick Lamb, former Colorado Governor Dick Lamb, because every time you met Dick, the first question out of his mouth was, "Hey, what you reading? What are you reading?" And we always would talk about books. So in this segment with "Hey, what you reading?" We're looking at what are some of your favorite books in the genres of either fiction or nonfiction set in the American West. And I know you've mentioned a few already, but some recommendations of books, old or new, set in the American West, fiction or nonfiction.
You mentioned Willa Cather. I love her books on the West. I think she captured so much of what the West was like back then. Michener did a lot. His Centennial. If you skip the first 100 pages of his book about the heaving earth, it's a great history of the West, the importance of the sugar beet movement, the growth of sugar beets, the cattle industry. He really captured what the West was about.
And the Centennial, that's a must read for anybody who moves out to Colorado or to the West, for sure.
I've actually never
said something interesting, and I'm glad you brought him up. He said once that essentially nonfiction is what is the bones of history. Fiction puts flesh on the bones. It tells you how people think. Nonfiction tells you what happened, but fiction tells you how that affected people and how they reacted to it. And he had a real sense of what both fiction and nonfiction did.
Absolutely. Well,
Sam,
what about you, Kateri?
Oh.
Oh, okay. No, I'll go first.
You
That's
go first.
fine.
I always go first.
So I've grouped a couple here. Some familiar authors, and maybe one that or two that some I think people on this call will have heard of, but maybe the wider audience has. So I'm gonna share two fiction that are kind of clumped together, and two nonfiction that I think are clumped together. My two fiction, one is an author that's on the call right now, and then one is an author she mentioned. So Kent Harriff's Plain Song and Sandra Dallas's Tall Grass, both of which take place in Eastern Colorado. And for me, both books set in different periods, set with completely different characters, but unlocked that very strange part of Colorado, but that also rolls into Kansas, this plains area, this very dry and harsh area, in different ways for me, and told me history of both, as well as the sort of people that live there. And of course, I've effused about Sandra being such a beautiful writer and her Tall Grass being such a beautiful book, but Ken Harriff as well, his Plain Song set of books, or the books that kind of follow that, are just absolutely marvelous. And both of them, again, speak to those universal ideas of the human condition. So they transcend this very sparsely populated part of the West to tell universal stories. And then for nonfiction, I really enjoy books that challenge our perceptions of what the West is. And so one is Marie Sandos's Crazy Horse. Now, Marie Sandos was a writer of several books of nonfiction, but I especially love Crazy Horse, and especially the edition that is introduced by the great Vine Deloria Jr., where Vine, as a member of the Sioux Nation, wrestles with the fact that this outsider has written this history of the great Sioux warrior, and as a young man admits in his introduction about how much he disliked the book, and then finally, as he got mature, understood what Sandos was doing with this book, which was deep and profound, and as he calls it, probably the best articulation of the life of this one person, as well as the history of the Sioux at that period. And then another book, and again, someone who Sandra, I know, knows very well, is Legacy of Conquest by Patty Limerick, formerly of UC Colorado Boulder, which kind of exploded this myth of the West and Manifest Destiny to tell the other side of that story, and what that legacy of conquest that continues to this very day means for being a Westerner. I remember getting handed that book when I moved to Colorado for the first time, and how much it just opened my eyes to what I didn't really know about the state, and the fact that the state was, or the West was still fighting so many of the battles that had fought for hundreds of years, and that was still such a rich part of who the Westerner was. So those are mine.
Nice. Those are good choices. And for you have more than me this time.
Wow, that's a rarity.
I know, right? I chose my books based off two of my favorite places. I always try to pick up a book wherever I go, if it's a place I actually enjoy visiting. And the first is set in the Moab area specifically, but it's about the whole Colorado Plateau, and it's Ed Abbey's Desert Solitaire, which is just one of my favorites of all time. The writing is amazing. His voice is amazing. His way of kind of capturing this landscape and making it a character in the book, along with this like understanding of what's going on in the world and in the environment, and like how that impacts us as people. So that's a book that I go back to over and over. And the second book I chose is more set in New Mexico, and it's called Descanso for My Father. It's by Harrison Candelaria Fletcher, who's a Colorado author as well. And it's this really gorgeous collection of hybrid kind of hermit crabby essays that explore with the reader the author's relationship with his father, and kind of learning more about him because he didn't know a ton about him before his death. And the way that he captures New Mexico is, I've never read anything like it. So that's another book that I go back to all the time, and it's so good. So those are my picks.
Wonderful picks all around. Wonderful authors, wonderful stories, and wonderful ways of looking at the West. Sandra, you mentioned you're working on a new book. What is the name of that one again?
I had a book that just came out called Where Coyotes Howl. It's set in Wyoming in 1916.
Okay. And are you working on a next one right now, or are you taking a pause?
No, my agent has a couple of manuscripts now.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
One that I turned in not long ago, and one that I turned in about 10 years ago, and she didn't like, but she's taken another look at it and decides that maybe it's publishable. So
Oh, goodness.
we'll see about those.
Well, that is wonderful. And we look forward to not only reading the new book, but seeing future books as you continue to, as you say, be the ARP poster woman here for productivity. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is absolutely wonderful talking with you and seeing you and visiting with you today.
Oh, this was terrific. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Terry.
Of course, thank you.